Okay, so it's time for us to jump back into some more X-Cutioner song. Now, with that being said, we're going to cover another 3 more chapters. So, part 9, part 10, and also part 11. Now, with these 3 chapters, I do want to say real quickly the reason why we're not covering part 12 as well, along with these 3 chapters, because there is actually an epilogue that comes out right after part 12. And I want to kind of use that epilogue as a way to say, hey, we are going to begin our next coverage over X-Men comics leading into the next crossover, which should be Fatal Attractions. So, with that being said, the next video will actually be our last one. But today we're going to cover part 9, 10, and 11. And so with that, when it comes to part 9, it actually does take place in the Uncanny X-Men issue number 296. Now, the opening pages of this book does remind us of a few things going on in this crossover. So, for example, Cyclops and Jean Grey, because remember, they were kidnapped by Strife at the very beginning of this crossover. Technically, they were kidnapped by Mr. Sinister, and then he had handed them over to Strife. But again, that all took place at the very beginning of the actual crossover. But we do see our 2 heroes trying to escape from the actual base of Strife. Now, while doing that, they are confronted by the Dark Riders. Now, the Dark Riders are not like Apocalypse Horsemen. They're kind of like a lower ranking group that Apocalypse used for different kinds of reasons. Now, when it came to Strife, when he had battle against Apocalypse, he was able to beat down on Apocalypse. So for the Dark Riders, they're kind of like, hey, you know what? You had defeated our master. And it kind of showed that he was not strong enough to actually lead us. And so now you have the Dark Riders following Strife. And currently, they're trying to fight against Cyclops and Jean Grey, who are trying to escape. Now, for our heroes, they are able to easily take down some members of the Dark Riders. Now, while they are trying to escape, they have no idea that technically they are being watched by Strife. Now, this is Strife saying, like, listen, I let them escape because this is also part of my plan as well. Now, when it comes to this actual crossover, we're still kind of learning more and more things about the character of Strife. And really, we're not going to know everything until the very end of the actual crossover. Now, we have to jump over to Beast in the medical lab, who's trying his best to, save the life of Charles Xavier, who was infected by the techno-organic virus. Now, for Beast, this man has been trying so many different things that he thought could possibly help Charles fight against the virus. The problem is, nothing is working. And so for Beast, it does seem like he may have found something else that could possibly work. But then in the middle of him trying to figure out if it could work, he is then messaged by Moira McTaggart, who then tells him that she has a message that was left behind by Strife. And of course, it's Strife saying, I am smarter than you, kind of playing mind games with our heroes. Now we have to jump over to Cable, Bishop, and also Wolverine. Now remember, those characters are technically their own group right now, and they're also trying their best to figure out how can they locate the actual base of Strife. Now technically, these pages are being used as a way to remind us a few things about Strife, and really, it's not a lot to go by because all we know is that for some reason Strife had went out of his way to kidnap Cyclops and Jean Grey, apparently the heart of the X-Men, but also Strife has the same face as Cable. What is the big connection between Strife, Cable, Cyclops, and Jean Grey? Because the Bishop, if they are able to figure out what that connection is, then most likely they have the key they need to defeat Strife and end this madness once and for all. Now, I want to jump back over to Cyclops and Jean Grey. Here's the reason why. Because you have Strife leaving out so many clues that kind of say like, hey, there is some big connection between you guys and me. And really, it's Strife saying like, hey, I could possibly be your son that you had given up in the past when it came to Apocalypse, who had also gave me the techno-organic virus. And you had no choice but to go ahead and send me into the future to hopefully save my life. And the reason why I'm saying that because you have Cyclops and Jean Grey just running around the base of Strife. and they run into a baby that was left behind. And really, for Cyclops, he's kind of like, why in the world is there a baby here? That is kind of weird. But now we have to jump over to Apocalypse. Now remember, Apocalypse, when it came to our last video, this man fought against Strife. And this man lost to Strife really badly. Because remember, ever since the huge X Factor in-game story arc, Apocalypse has been healing up. The problem is, every single time he tries to go through the actual healing process, something stops him from actually healing up. And so when it came to his battle against Strife, he was not completely healed up yet. And so you actually have Strife being able to beat down on Apocalypse. Now for Apocalypse, he was able to escape. And he went over to the X-Mansion to basically say, hey, X-Men, if you guys want to be able to take down Strife, you have to work with me. It's the only way to actually defeat him. Now, for the X-Men, they're kind of like, why should we help you out? And it's Apocalypse saying, because I can save the life of Charles Xavier. And so at first, you have our hero say, no, we can't trust you. But for Archangel, he's kind of like, no, we can trust Apocalypse when it comes to hopefully saving the life of Charles Xavier. And the reason why, because Archangel has seen firsthand what Apocalypse can do with that kind of technology, meaning that Apocalypse is their only hope to save the life of Charles Xavier. Now, once we jump back over to Wolverine, Bishop, and also Cable, you have our three characters realize like, hey, what if Strife is hiding in plain sight? Like, he knew that we would not look in a certain area when it comes to try to figure out where he's working out of. And so you have our heroes sit down and realize that for Strife, he will be working out of a base that was possibly owned in the past by Apocalypse, that has not been used by Apocalypse in a good while. And so for our heroes, they realize this man is on the moon. Because let's not forget, the last time we saw Apocalypse was back in X Factor Endgame, where you had X Factor teaming up with the Inhumans to battle against Apocalypse in the blue area of the moon. And so for our heroes are like, he's there. He has to be there. But now we have to jump back over to Jean Grey and also Strife. Now, this is really important, and let me explain why. Because you had these two characters with a baby. Now, for Cyclops, he's kind of like, this baby looks very similar to Nathan, the son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, the same child he had to give up. Let that child go into the future to hopefully save his life. And so for Cyclops, he's kind of like, why is this baby here in the middle of the base of Strife? Now, for Jean Grey, she was able to use her powers and realize that this baby is actually a real baby. And the question is right now, how can they save the child's life? Now, you do have Strife appear. He says, listen, if you pull that child out of that device, he is going to die, because that device is basically life support for the child. Now, for Strife, he gives our heroes a tough choice here. He says, listen, if you want to save the life of that child, you have to give up your lives as a way to save the life of that child. But if you want to survive, then you have no choice but to go ahead and give up the life of that child to save your own. And so the question is right now, will our heroes be actual heroes here at the moment? And for Cyclops and Jean Grey, they're kind of like, hey, to save the life of this child, we'll go ahead and give up our lives here. But for Strife, that is not the answer at all he wanted. And so he released the Dark Riders to fight against our heroes once again, to make sure they cannot give up so easily. Now, the last couple pages of this chapter, we do see Jean Grey and Cyclops be sucked through some kind of vortex. And when they go through the actual vortex, they actually end up on the outside of the base of Strife to give us confirmation that, yes, currently our heroes are no longer on Earth. They're on the moon, possibly the blue area of the moon where Apocalypse Base used to be at. It's where Strife is working out of at the moment. And so now we have to jump over to X Factor issue number 86, part 10 of this crossover. And we do pick up with Wolverine, Cable, and Bishop contacting the rest of the heroes to inform them that they were able to figure out where Jean Grey and Cyclops were taken to. Like, hey guys, listen, we sat down, we realized that it makes a whole lot of sense that first Strife, he's working out of the base of, well, Apocalypse Moon base. And so it kind of makes sense why Jean Grey was not really able to send any message to the rest of the heroes when it came to her mind. Because Jean Grey is a very powerful telepath. But at the same time, though, she's not really that powerful to send a message across space from the moon over to Earth. And so for our heroes, it kind of makes sense. Now, we're also establishing the whole idea of Wolverine and Jean Grey. Not establishing, really more of re-establishing, because for a while now, it has not really been mentioned the fact that Jean Grey is also madly in love with Wolverine. Now, Cyclops, he comes first, but Wolverine, he's a hard second. And so for Logan, he's kind of like, I didn't realize that she was trying her best to contact me when it came to her psychic abilities. But now I realize that she has been, and now I also know they're on the moon and we have to go there now in a hurry. Now, Wolverine, Storm, and Bishop, they'll go there first. The rest of the X-Men will catch up as soon as they can. Now, for Storm and Havoc, they're going to put together a strike team to go save Cyclops and Jean Grey alongside with Wolverine, Bishop, and also Cable. So for this strike team, you have Havoc, Psylocke, Archangel, Iceman, Polaris, Cannonball, and you also have Storm. So there goes your strike team. Now, Beast, of course, he'll stay behind and continue to hopefully work alongside with Apocalypse to figure out if they're able to save the life of Charles Xavier. Now, I wanted to quickly jump back over to Cyclops and Jean Grey because even though they're technically outside the actual base of Strife and are having a hard time breathing, you have Jean Grey being able to create a force field around them. Now, with that force field, they are able to breathe, but that oxygen is going away very fast. And so for Strife, we see him continue to keep mentioning different things about the idea that he wants to get revenge against both Cyclops and Jean Grey for something they did in the past. And we're kind of like, what is it? And for our heroes, they have to hurry and figure it out before they run out of air. But now I want to jump over to the whole process of Apocalypse trying to save the life of Charles Xavier, because you're going to have everyone freaking out when it comes to this moment right here. Because when it comes to Apocalypse, he does begin to do some work on the actual body of Charles Xavier. Except when it comes to Apocalypse, it kind of seems like he had accelerated the whole entire process of the techno-organic virus inside the body of Charles Xavier. And so for our heroes, they kind of believe that Apocalypse is trying to kill off Charles, or at least do something really dark with Charles. Now, for Val Cooper, she believes that Archangel has been tricking the heroes the entire time. She believes they have been tricked because he's not doing anything at all. It's Archangel just standing there, allowing Charles Xavier to go through some kind of process that has been started by Apocalypse. But you have Archangel say no. Like, he just stands there kind of like, woman, if you believe that I am not right now trying to kill off Charles Xavier, then you are completely crazy and wild. Like, I'm standing here because I know what Apocalypse is doing is gonna to the life of Charles Xavier. Now, I want to jump back over to Cyclops, Jean Grey, and also Strife. Here's the reason why. Because you have Strife still being that huge jerk where you have all three characters inside the bubble. Now, for Strife, he's okay. But for Cyclops and Jean Grey, they're running out of air very quickly here. And he wants them to beg for him to save their lives. But he already knew that these two characters were not going to do that at all. But for him, he still wanted to see them beg for him to save their lives. Now, I want to jump back over to Apocalypse because you have Apocalypse explaining what he did to actually save the life of Charles Xavier. He said, listen, he had to grow the virus into a higher growth stage. And the reason why, because when it comes to the techno-organic virus, it feeds off organic matter. But the problem was for the virus, thanks to Apocalypse, it had grown to a higher, bigger state than it was originally. And for Charles Xavier, even though he does have a lot of organic matter to feed off of, but not enough for a virus that has now been fully grown. And so it looked at Apocalypse as a new source of organic matter to eat. And so it left the body of Charles Xavier trying to go over to Apocalypse. But once it was out of the body of Charles Xavier, you then had Apocalypse being able to actually kill off the virus. So Charles is now saved, but he needs some time to actually rest. Now, to end this chapter, we do jump back over to Wolverine, Bishop, and Cable, who do teleport right over to where the base of Apocalypse used to be at on the moon. Now, when they do arrive, they are surrounded by an army of people who are currently working for Strife. So now for our heroes, if they want to be able to save the life of Jean Grey and Cyclops, they're going to have to fight their way over to Strife and then most likely fight Strife to save Cyclops and Jean Grey. Now, the next chapter does take place in X-Men issue number 16, part 11. Now, we pick up with Bishop, Cable, and also Wolverine, like I said earlier, arriving at the base of Strife. Now, when they do arrive, they are surrounded by his entire force. And so you have our heroes just trying their best to survive. Now, at first, it does look like our heroes might be able to hold their own, but then you have Wolverine get hit hard. And so it does seem like maybe our three heroes are about to meet their end. But then out of nowhere, Havoc's strike team does arrive. So Storm, Havoc, Polaris, Psylocke, Iceman, Archangel, I want to say Rogue as well. You also have Apocalypse there. And they all arrive just in time to help out their team to fight against the forces of Strife. Now, while you have our heroes fighting against Strife's forces, you have Strife watching them. And for Strife, he's kind of like, look at them. Like, look at them fighting for so many different reasons. The way they fight, they have so much diversity in their fighting skills, their fighting purposes. But either way, for Strife, he said it does not matter because by the end of all of this, they're going to realize that I am there tomorrow, that I am going to win. Now, for Strife, he does walk out over to Cyclops and Jean Grey. Now, we are continuing to show how powerful Strife is because you didn't have Strife being able to use his telekinesis powers to move the wall so easily around him, Cyclops, and Jean Grey. And he takes them out somewhere else into a different base that's on the moon as well. And so you kind of have to wonder, what is he trying to show Cyclops and Jean Grey? Now, for me personally, like I said earlier, this man has been dropping so many hints of like, hey, I keep calling us family, you father of mutants, mother of mutants, prince of mutants, like I could possibly be your long lost son. Either way, you have Strife take Cyclops and Jean Grey somewhere else. Now, I want to jump back over to Charles Xavier. Here's the reason why. Because you have Beast telling us that Charles Xavier is slowly healing up. But here's the big catch. You see, right now, Charles' body still has a very high temperature, 103. Now, for Beast, he feels like Charles' body is going to heal up properly thanks to Apocalypse. But for Beast, he's very worried about the mind of Charles Xavier. He kind of realized there's something going on inside the mind of Charles. The question is, at the moment, what is Charles going through when it comes to his mind? But getting back over to our heroes, and I guess also Apocalypse as well, you have our heroes begin to go their separate ways as a way to look for Cyclops and Jean Grey. Now, really for Apocalypse, he goes on his own. Really for Apocalypse, it's all about the idea of survival of the fittest because he believes that the weak does not deserve to live, but the strong, they deserve to live and actually lead the weak. And so for Apocalypse, it's kind of like, listen, I got to prove something. thing. I gotta find Strife and get my look back, basically. And so you have Apocalypse just walk away. Now, for the rest of the X characters, they break up into multiple teams to go look for Cyclops and Jean Grey. Now, after a few pages, you did have our heroes being able to realize that Strife has taken Cyclops and Jean Grey out to the surface of the moon. Now, in reality, it may seem like he had taken them possibly to a different base that's also on the moon as well. Now, like I said a moment ago, the whole idea of survival of the fittest, because when we jump back over to Apocalypse, he is confronted by the Dark Riders. Now, the Dark Riders, they're kind of like, hey, Master, it's nice to see you again. So currently, right now, we serve Strife. And because, again, Strife had defeated Apocalypse, survival of the fittest. And so for the Dark Riders, they want to prove that they're actually stronger than their actual old master. And so for Apocalypse, he's all like, okay, you want to do this? You want to use me as the test to see how strong you are? Bring it on. And so you have Apocalypse just run straight towards them for one heck of a battle. But getting back over to the X teams, they were able to figure out that where Strife has taken Cyclops and Jean Grey, and it seems to be a separate base he had on the moon. And so either way, you do have our heroes head over there to hopefully save their teammates. Now, I want to jump back over to Charles Xavier because this is going to begin the cliffhanger I am going to use in this video. Because when we jump over to Charles Xavier, this man, he wakes up. When he wakes up, he's freaking out like he has just went through a lot inside his mind, which honestly, he has gone through a lot when it comes to this crossover. But for Charles Xavier, he looks over at Beast and says, listen, I realize what is happening. The connection between Cyclops, Jean Grey, Cable, and also Strife. They are all connected. They are all connected. And you have to understand, it's all about love and hate. And so that is the moment where you have some of the X characters arrive at the base, the second base that Strife is currently using, where we see Jean Grey and Cyclops just standing there kind of being stuck in position thanks to Strife. But you didn't have Cable walk up. Now, when Cable walks up, you have Strife say, come here, Nathan Dayspring. It's time for you and I to have a long conversation, my brother. And it's kind of like, wait a second. We are finally about to learn everything about Cable and Strife in this crossover. And so in the next video, we'll cover the final chapter, also the epilogue of the X-Cutioner song. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.